few years ago, I booked a holiday on a cruise ship. I had never been on a cruise before, and I was excited about the experience. The thought of sailing across the open sea, feeling the ocean breeze, and indulging in the luxury of a massive floating hotel sounded like a dream. When I boarded the ship, everything seemed perfect. The sun was shining, the deck was buzzing with excited passengers, and the sound of the waves was strangely calming. I checked in at the reception, where a polite but slightly nervous-looking crew member handed me my key card. "Cabin 105, she said, hesitating for just a second before smiling. "Enjoy your trip." I didn't think much of her hesitation at the time. The moment I stepped into cabin 105, I felt something. The air inside was damp and heavy, carrying an unmistakable stench of mildew and salt water. The cabin was small, with a bunk bed, a tiny wardrobe, and a porthole that looked out into the endless ocean. A single suitcase sat neatly beside the wardrobe. My roommate's, I assumed. I found it odd that he wasn't there. I unpacked my bag, washed my face, and lay down on the bottom bunk, exhausted from the excitement of the day. The mattress was comfortable enough, but no matter how I positioned myself, the damp smell wouldn't go away. That night, as the ship set sail, I fell asleep quickly. A midnight disturbance. I woke up abruptly to a loud noise. At first, I thought it was the sound of the waves crashing against the ship, but then I heard something else, a groan from the top bunk. I tensed. I hadn't met my roommate yet, but he must have arrived while I was asleep. Maybe he wasn't feeling well. Then I heard a shuffle. The mattress above me creaked as if someone was shifting their weight. Then, without warning, I heard the distinct sound of the door unlocking. My eyes shot open, footsteps fast, heavy, running down the corridor. The door swung on its hinges, creaking loudly as the ship rocked with the waves. Cold air rushed in, making my skin prickle. I sat up, heart pounding. I waited for a moment, listening, silence. The only sound was the distant hum of the ship and the soft splashing of waves against the hull. I stood up, crossed the room, and shut the door, locking it. Still half asleep, I climbed back into bed, telling myself that my roommate had simply gone out. Maybe he felt seasick and needed fresh air. Still, something about the whole thing didn't sit right with me. An ominous warning. The next morning, the sea was rough. The ship rocked harder than the night before, and the damp smell in my room seemed stronger than ever. I shivered and got up to shut the porthole, which was hanging open. I was sure it had been closed the night before. The top bunk's curtains were still drawn. I hesitated. Should I check if my roommate was there? Something about that bunk made my stomach tighten. Instead, I quickly dressed and left the cabin. Upon deck, the fresh air helped clear my head. I found one of the ship's stewards and mentioned how freezing and damp my cabin was. "Which cabin are you in?" he asked casually. "Cabin 105, I replied. His expression changed instantly. His face went pale, his lips parted slightly, and for a moment he just stared at me. "What's the matter?" I asked. He glanced around nervously. Nothing," he mumbled. "It's just that people who stay in that cabin always complain about it." He lowered his voice. "There's something not right about that room." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "I really shouldn't be saying this," he whispered, "but the last 3 people who stayed there," he swallowed hard. "They jumped overboard." A chill ran down my spine. "Jumped?" I repeated. The steward nodded. "It's like the cabin gets inside their heads." Just then, the captain approached us. "Have you seen your roommate?" he asked me directly. "No," I said. "Why?" "He seems to have disappeared," the captain replied grimly. "We're afraid he might have jumped overboard." I felt the blood drain from my face. I barely registered the rest of the conversation. I walked away in a daze, the steward's words repeating in my mind. The last 3 people, they jumped overboard, and now my roommate. That night, when I returned to my cabin, I stood outside the door for a long time before entering. The air inside was even colder than before. The dampness had turned into something worse, something foul, like rotting seaweed left out in the sun. I swallowed hard and forced myself to step inside. The top bunk's curtains were still drawn. Slowly, I reached out and pulled them back. The bed was empty. No sheets were ruffled, no sign that anyone had ever been there. Yet I knew what I had heard the night before. I knew someone had groaned up there. I knew someone had left that cabin in a hurry or something. I climbed into my bunk, forcing myself to ignore the suffocating atmosphere. Sleep didn't come easily. The presence. In the middle of the night, I woke up again. A loud bang shook the room. The porthole was wide open again, slamming against the wall. I sat up shivering and swung my legs over the side of the bed. As I stood up to close it, I heard it. A groan. From the top bunk, a cold sweat broke out on my skin. Turned my head slowly, my pulse hammering in my ears. The room was pitch dark, but I heard it as something moved up there. I took a deep breath, and despite every instinct telling me not to, I reached out. The moment my fingers touched the mattress, it grabbed me. Something wet, something heavy, something ice cold. I screamed and yanked my hand away. The thing sprang at me. It was like being hit by a wave of freezing, slimy flesh, a clammy mass of rotting, bloated horror. The room filled with the unbearable stench of decaying seaweed and stagnant ocean water. I fell backward, scrambling to get away, but it was strong. I couldn't breathe, the weight of it pressed against my chest, its grip like a vice around my throat. Just when I thought I was about to die, the door burst open. I gasped as the thing suddenly released me and vanished into the corridor. I scrambled to my feet, choking and shivering. I rushed after it, but the hallway was empty. I was alone, but I knew that thing had been real. I stood in the dimly lit corridor, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it would burst out of my chest. My breath came in ragged gasps as I scanned the empty hallway. The ship rocked slightly, making the shadows shift along the walls. The thing that attacked me, whatever it was, had vanished. I turned back toward my cabin. I didn't want to go back in there, but I had nowhere else to go. Slowly, I stepped inside and turned on the lights. The room was empty. The top bunk, however, was soaked. The sheets were dripping wet, and a small puddle of seawater had formed on the floor beneath it. The foul stench of rotting seaweed filled the air, making me gag. I grabbed my suitcase. I was going to demand a new room. The captain's challenge. I stormed up to the reception desk, my hands still shaking. "I need a different cabin," I said, barely containing the panic in my voice. The woman at the desk looked up and frowned. "What seems to be the problem?" "There's something wrong with cabin 105, I said firmly. "I don't care if I have to pay extra. Just put me anywhere else." Her fingers hesitated over the keyboard, and then she swallowed hard. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The ship is fully booked." I clenched my jaw. "Then I'll sleep on the deck." A voice behind me interrupted. "That won't be necessary." I turned to see the captain approaching, his expression unreadable. "I heard about what happened," he said, "and I want to assure you there is a rational explanation." I laughed dryly. "Oh, really? Then explain why my cabin smells like a corpse, why my porthole keeps opening by itself, and why something tried to kill me tonight." The captain's face darkened. He looked at the woman behind the desk and then back at me. "You're not the first to say these things," he admitted, lowering his voice. "But there's no proof of anything supernatural, just stories, rumors." "Then stay with me tonight," I said before I could stop myself. "Stay in cabin 105 with me. If there's nothing wrong, you have nothing to worry about, right?" The challenge hung in the air. The captain hesitated, his jaw tightening. Then with a small nod, he said, "Fine, I'll stay with you. Let's put these ghost stories to rest." Night of terror. That night, the captain met me outside cabin 105. He was dressed in his uniform, but he carried a small bottle of whiskey, as if he expected nothing more than a long, uneventful night. "Shall we?" he said. I took a deep breath and unlocked the door. The second we stepped inside, I felt it. The air was thick, suffocating, like stepping into a cold, damp grave. The foul stench of the sea was stronger than ever. We searched the room from top to bottom. The wardrobe, the bathroom, under the beds, nothing. The captain even knocked against the walls, checking for hidden compartments. "There's nothing here," he said finally, sitting down in the chair near the door. I sat on the edge of my bunk, rubbing my hands together to keep warm. "The first time it happened," the captain began, taking a swig from his bottle, "was about a month ago. The passenger who stayed here was a mental patient. He escaped from an asylum and bought a ticket on this ship." I stiffened. "What happened?" The captain sighed. "In the middle of the night, he threw himself overboard. A gust of wind rattled the porthole, the lights flickered. But that doesn't explain the others," I said. "3 more people." I stopped. The captain's eyes had widened. I turned and followed his gaze. The bolt on the porthole was slowly turning. My blood ran cold. Without warning, the lights went out. The room was plunged into absolute darkness. A low groan echoed through the cabin. I grabbed onto the bedpost, my breath caught in my throat. The ship rocked violently, slamming the porthole open with a loud bang. The top bunk's curtains fluttered. The mattress above me sagged as if something had just crawled onto it. The captain shot to his feet. "There's something in the bunk," he shouted. Then, a horrible, wet sound, like something slithering. I turned just in time to see it. A massive, bloated thing crawled from the top bunk. Its skin was pale and swollen, covered in patches of peeling flesh. Water dripped from its sagging limbs. Its fingers, long and gnarled, ended in cracked, blackened nails. But its face, oh God, its face, its dead white eyes stared blankly. Its lips were bloated and blue, curling into a grotesque frozen grin. The corpse of a drowned man, and it was coming straight for us. The captain swore and lunged for the door, but before he could unlock it, the thing sprang forward. It tackled him with an inhuman strength, knocking him to the floor. I stumbled backward, pressing myself against the wall as the thing crawled over him, its bloated hands gripping his throat. The captain gasped, struggling, his legs kicking wildly. I couldn't move. Then somehow my body reacted. I grabbed the whiskey bottle from the floor and smashed it over the thing's head. The bottle shattered. The thing turned toward me. For a split second, I saw recognition in its dead eyes. It knew me. I grabbed the lamp from the bedside table and swung it as hard as I could. The thing let out a sickening gurgle as the force of the blow knocked it backward. The captain scrambled to his feet, gasping for air. Together, we threw ourselves at the door, wrenching it open and stumbling into the hallway. We turned, expecting the thing to follow us, but the room was empty, except for one thing. The top bunk's sheets were soaked with seawater, and in the center of the mattress was a single rotting handprint. The captain didn't say a word. An hour later, ship crew members arrived, hammering wooden boards over the door to cabin 105. To this day, no one has ever stayed in that room again. And I pray that whatever was in there never finds a way out.